Okay, everyone, welcome. Good to have you here. It's a great turnout today. So we are delighted to have Brett here and have all of you to talk about legislative research policy updates. Before I kick things off, just want to do a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you, of course, to Brett for traveling here and being here, to Michelle Porter, who helped us stay organized, to Natasha and Megan and others that helped us to communicate this, and to Laura Buccini as well, who's very helpful in this. So just a few words of introduction for Brett. Brett, we're delighted to have you here. Brett Rudy serves as the Assistant Vice President for Federal Relations and Health Policy for the University of Colorado and represents CU in Washington, D.C. He represents the university with federal officials, national organizations, and government entities on health policy issues, medical research, and public health funding, as well as healthcare workforce development and coverage issues. Prior to joining CU in early 2022, Brett worked for the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC, and the Association for Public Land Grant Universities, where he focused on health equity, workforce development, and issues impacting students. He is a graduate of the University of Delaware with a bachelor's degree in political science, and he earned his master's degree in political management from George Washington University. He is a native New Yorker. Brett currently resides in Washington, D.C., and we're, of course, delighted to have you here in Denver today. I'll just say one other thing. We're glad to have you here. The turnout's been good. The response is really strong. This is a different kind of talk. Brett and I have been kind of brainstorming about this for 6 months or more. Brett and Laura Brett has put a lot of thought into this. Laura's been assisting as well, and we really look forward to your feedback. Is this helpful? Are there other sorts of talks in this vein that would be useful to you? And without any further ado, I'll turn things over to Brett.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flake. Can you all hear me okay? I do apologize. I do have a little bit of a cough, so if you kind of hear me get a little raspy or cough, I do apologize ahead of time. Really excited to kind of be with you all today to kind of just give a little bit of a legislative overview about what Congress has previously accomplished, and as well, mostly to see what we're going to be looking forward to with this upcoming Congress this year. The way that I'm kind of going to do this presentation is go agency by agency and talk about its funding levels and its updates. So bear with me. Like Tom said, I am a native New Yorker. I tend to talk fast. So please let me know if you need me to repeat anything at the end, and we're going to hopefully have a good amount of time for Q&A. So first of all, I just want to give a little bit of an overview of the CU Office of Government Relations. Part of what I do is to really not only connect CU to our members of DC, members of Congress in DC and federal agencies, but as well as connect DC to CU. We've had members of Congress, federal officials come to campus. Today is actually my 1 year here at CU. And I think we've had about 4 different members of Congress and 3 different federal officials come over the last year. So we're here to kind of be your organization and buffer between the members of Congress and federal officials, as well as CU, whether it's here in Denver, in the Denver area, in Aurora, or in Washington, D.C. If you ever want to meet with a member of Congress or ever have anything along those lines, please reach out to us. We have strong relationships with everyone in all 10 of the offices that are now in our state. And we are kind of here to make sure that everything is aligning with university policy. So that's just a little bit of introduction about us. But now we're going to talk about what the 117th Congress accomplished, which was the Congress that ended last December. What's really interesting is most of what they completed was in a piece of legislation that passed late December, on December 23rd, actually, and the fiscal year 2023 funding bills, which also included the Prevent Pandemic Act, the ARPA-H authorization, mental health legislation, diversity in clinical trials, and the VIPER Act, which is a VA medical research authorization program. We'll be talking all about those more a little bit as we get farther into this presentation, as well as the CHIPS and Science Act, which was an authorization for the National Science Foundation. But one of the things that they did complete last year was the Medical Marijuana and Cannabinoidal Research Expansion Act, which removes the federal prohibition on medical research in marijuana and cannabinoids, but it does not move it from a Schedule 1. So it still has its schedule, but it releases the prohibition. It also allows the DEA to increase the number of approved growers and dispensaries for medical marijuana research. So previously we only had one legal entity in Mississippi that you can use research on. Now they're going to start expanding it up. I actually believe they have already approved it up to 5 since this legislation was signed into law in November. We're waiting for more regulations out of the DEA, but we are monitoring this. And we're going to be working with our university councils across our system, as well as our research office, to make sure that anyone that does research with marijuana for medicinal purposes is up to date on kind of what's happening. And it is the first marijuana bill to pass Congress. So that's why I kind of got a lot of press and a lot of noise, because they've never passed anything along those lines. So now we're going to kind of give a little bit of an overview of the 118th Congress, the current Congress, and what may or may not happen. In our current Colorado delegation, we now have 10 members. We have Senator Bennett, who was just elected to another 6-year term in the Senate, as well as Senator Hickenlooper, who is now in his second Congress. So he's entering his year 3. So we're going to monitor what committees he sits on. He may try and become an appropriator, which helps fund our government. If he doesn't, he'll still be on the authorization committee for medical research. So we're just monitoring to see his movement. We're also very lucky to have a very supportive delegation, especially if we look at Congresswoman Diana DeGette, who is really big on medical research in her role on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and she does downtown Denver. Congressman Crow has been a huge supporter of us, where our district is located. He has visited campus many times and will continue to support us. But I do want to highlight our 2 new members of Congress. Rep. Brittany Pedersen, who is from Congressional District 7, which was Ed Perlmutter's old district. She's newer to Congress. She's was previously a state senator, as well as Congresswoman Yadira Caraveo, who's from the new Congressional District 8, which was redrawn into this year. Congresswoman Caraveo is actually a CU School of Medicine grad and a pediatrician. So we're incredibly excited to have a doctor who is one of us and part of our family now in Congress. So we're going to be working with her over the next year. They've been in Congress now for just a little over 3 weeks. So we're going to let them ease into it, but we look forward to working with them. That being said, our Congress is now a split government. The Republicans control the House by an incredibly narrow majority of 222 to 213. And then the Senate's controlled by the Democrats by a vote of 51 to 49. That means there's little room for error on either party. We are seeing incredibly slim majorities, and it's going to be hard to get anything done that doesn't have broad bipartisan consensus. We already saw the difficulties of that in the House of Representatives with the speaker vote, how such a slim majority can really hold things up. So it's going to be a very interesting Congress. There's definitely going to be a lot that they're going to have to work on to really push through in a bipartisan matter. And that includes some must-pass legislation, the debt ceiling, which may be running out today. It may be running out on September 30th. We do not know, but they have to address that by September 30th. The National Defense Authorization Act, which authorizes the Department of Defense, has to get passed every year. The government funding bills have to get passed, as well as something that that they have to take on this year is the Pandemic and All Hazardous Preparedness Act, which authorizes agencies such as ASPR and BARDA and the Hospital Preparedness Program. That expires on September 30th. So we will be closely monitoring that. The Farm Bill, which does the Department of Agriculture and the SNAP program, or the food stamp program, also needs to be done by September 30th. So there's a lot. These are all programs that have historic bipartisan support, so they will have to get that done. With the House of Representatives having a Republican majority, we do expect a lot of oversight of the current administration. That always happens when the opposing party of the president takes power. So we're going to really see that a lot with the agencies. I would expect it in the medical research space as well, which we will get to later in the PowerPoint. Foreign influence and gift reporting is another interesting one. The House, by a very wide bipartisan vote, passed to create a House Select Subcommittee on strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. So things along those lines, relationships with China, foreign influence, reporting through the Department of Education on gifts and grants from foreign entities, all can come up through this committee. So that's something we are going to closely monitor over the year. In the Senate, given the fact that it's only a 2-seat majority for the Democrats, that gives them a little bit of a buffer with the administration trying to pass judges and other lead officials in the government. So we expect a lot of nominations and approving of judges. We need an NIH director. The CDC director now needs to be included and approved. So we'll talk about that later here, but that's something that's really going to be on the priority of the Senate this year. So now we're going to start our agency by agency kind of run over, and naturally we're going to start with the NIH, which is definitely something that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have interacted with. So in the funding bill that was passed in December, the NIH received $47.5 billion, which is a 2.5% or 2.5 billion or 5.56 increase over fiscal year 2022 levels. We're really happy to see the increases. Some agencies I just want to point out, here are all the institutes on here, but the National Cancer Institute received close to a 6% increase. The NHLBI had a 4.6% increase. NINDS has about an 8% increase. NIEHS has about an 8.5% increase. And actually the biggest increase over last year was for NIMHD, which had over 14% increase, which is really aligning with a lot of the work that the administration and Congress want to do within health disparities research in our country. So that's a huge increase. I will say every institute did receive at least a 3% increase, which is really nice to see. And it leads to historical bipartisan growth within the NIH. This is one of my favorite charts that one of my former colleagues at the AAMC does, because the green bars show what the actual funding levels are for NIH, but the red bar shows what it would be in terms of dollars in 2003 if you use the NIH bird pie inflation index. So if you can kind of see here, for after fiscal year 2022, if you kind of moved it down to real numbers using the inflation values, it is about even to what was done in 2003. It hasn't been updated with the FY 2023 numbers yet, but they just finally crossed that threshold of the about 26.2 billion in NIH if you adjust for inflation in fiscal year 2023. That means while there is great historical increases in NIH since fiscal year 2013, as you can kind of see here, it's not, our work is not done. We still need to continue to advocate for the advancement of medical research and make sure that we're kind of keeping up with the times to make sure that we're at the forefront of that. So now we're going to talk about kind of what to expect regarding the NIH within the House of Representatives and Congress. So in the House of Representatives, the authorizing committee of that is the Energy and Commerce Committee. And Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers from Washington is now the new chairwoman of the committee. She has been really adamant about opening up the bill that authorizes and organizes the NIH and how she really wants to kind of take that on. She has stated that health is her priority, and it is unclear if she wants to move this in a bipartisan or a partisan fashion. We are hearing more and more that the Democratic minority is willing to work with her on the authorization of the NIH this year and kind of see how we can reorganize it to better move it on. So we will be closely monitoring this issue. What I will say is, it was kind of too late. I finalized my slides when all this happened, but on Thursday night, actually the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, released a report on gain of function research, on gain of function with pathogen research as it came to the pandemic. And to put it nicely, it didn't look too good. It didn't really make the NIH look like they were really doing the bang for their buck on research. And gain of function is something that is a huge priority for Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers. And she actually immediately released a press release stating that this is why they need to do the reauthorization of NIH. So we'll definitely be working with Dr. Flagg and the team to submit comments or any ways that we can help influence how they want NIH to be looked or shaped, but it's something that's definitely really high on our radar. In the Senate, the NIH will be authorized by the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We actually have two new faces running that committee this year. We have the chair, which is Bernie Sanders, the independent from Vermont, who caucuses for the Democrats, with caucuses with the Democrats, while you have the Republican ranking member, Bill Cassidy, who's actually a cardiologist and used to practice in Louisiana. So it's really nice to have a doctor here. Both of them are real great supporters of medical research. Senator Sanders is really into cancer research, while actually a big priority for both men is on rural research, given the states of Louisiana and Vermont tend to be much more rural. That is something that is a top priority for both of them, as well as health disparities, which is a personal passion of Senator Cassidy. Something else this committee has to do is, I think now for almost a year, we've been without an NIH director. with Dr. Larry Tabak serving in the interim role. The administration still does need to appoint a new director, which does need to get confirmed by the Senate. So this is the committee that will be doing that. So we'll be closely monitoring to see what's happening with that. We keep hearing they're trying to run some people by Congress and they keep kind of getting rejected. So we're monitoring that. So it could happen tomorrow. It could happen 6 months from now. We don't really know, but it doesn't look like it will really be in the immediate future. So now one of the agencies that everyone is really interested in is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or ARPA-H. ARPA-H was actually authorized in the fiscal year 2023 legislation. There was a lot of back and forth between the House and Senate leaders on where to put this agency, and they decided to have it be its own institute within NIH. However, it is mandated in law that it cannot be located on NIH campuses, and it has to have offices in 3 distinct regions in the country. It can also be exempt from NIH policies, which I know was a really big issue kind of going into it, putting in NIH, given the advanced research portion of it. But this HHS secretary can waive anything along those lines. There will be no more than 8 program offices with no fewer than 2 to 3 dedicated to research and development. The director of ARPA-H can serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms, and the ARPA-H director must provide a strategic plan regarding the agency to Congress by the end of 2023. This is when we do really expect to see a little bit more of what the agency is going to look like and what it's going to be doing moving forward. Now we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what it received and where they currently are. In the fiscal year 2022 bill, it received about $1.5 billion. And in the fiscal year 2023 bill, it received $1 billion to kind of get the agency started. It is starting to hire staff in the agency. We have Dr. Renee Wergzin, who's the director of the agency. She comes from DARPA. They currently only have about 25 staff on payroll. So they are still really trying to ramp it up and move forward with it. They have started a call for new program officers that are being hired based off the ideas that they are pitching. So it's going to be much more similar to the DARPA model moving forward, and not the classic NIH model. We are looking really closely to see when they are hiring these programs officers, because once these program officers do get hired, we do expect them to move very quickly on the grant processes. So we are expecting these around, at the earliest, late Q2, but most likely Q3, Q4 for opportunities in ARPA-H. The next agency I want to talk about is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And one of the most striking things about the CDC is, if you kind of look at this chart, if you see between FY 2021 and fiscal year 2023, they've actually increased the budget for the CDC by about 25%, really growing it. It obviously is an agency that, to be frank and blunt, did not do super well during the pandemic. It really failed the American people. So it's something that Congress has been working on to not only reauthorize, which we'll talk about in the next slide, but really make sure that there is funding to make sure that we are dealing with our diseases and public health. Some of the things that they've really focused on is the cancer programs, as well as the community health and health disparities, with the maternal health research programs within there, and maternal health practice programs getting about a 30.1% increase. Advanced molecular detection, about a 15% increase. There's gun violence prevention research, which is 15 million in the CDC and about 12 million in the NIH, so it's a split program. But one of the biggest increases is for the Prevention and Public Health Fund, which got about a 9% increase, which most of that is from the Public Health Data Modernization Fund. So they're looking for research on how we can share data on public health and kind of up that. That received about a 75% increase last year. So there is a lot of opportunities for new programs within the CDC, and this is something that Congress has agreed to in a bipartisan fashion to kind of move forward and kind of push along the lines. And the way to talk about this is in the Prevent Pandemics Act, which was included in the year-end omnibus, which really looks to reshape the CDC on how it addresses public health emergencies, and as well as it looks at how not only the administration, the White House, works with Congress, but how the CDC works with the NIAID, as well as ASPR and BARDA, to make sure that all these agencies are kind of talking and not have a little bit of a separate cluster that we kind of had here. One of the things it also does is it's now making the CDC director a confirmed position by Congress, which used to never happen. It was something that Senator Richard Burr was really passionate about before he retired, when he was ranking member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And they spent about a year researching this bill and about 8 months writing it. So it is really comprehensive and really done well. One of the things that they're really focusing on is rapid diagnostic testing, genomic sequencing, and one of the most important things it does, it also addresses the issue with our national strategic stockpile. We actually had Senator Hickenlooper on campus to talk about this bill with not only leaders from CU, but as well as UC Health. Some of the things that he put into the bill was about early countermeasures, discovery, and biosurveillance capabilities, epidemic forecasting. Anyone along those lines is kind of what something that was put in with Colorado intent in it. So if anyone's really interested in any of these fields, please reach out to me. We are kind of looking to see what's going to happen with the increased funding for the CDC and their new authorization. It'll take them a couple of months to kind of get up to speed to start releasing these grants, but it's something that we know was really put into this bill due to with Colorado in mind. Other agencies within the HHS, just want to talk about the FDA. It received about a 7% increase in the fiscal year bill, but more importantly, they actually reauthorized the user fees, which is the majority of the funding for the FDA in September. So that's what's really the priority of funding to it. One of the things they included in the year-end bill was a clinical trial diversity and modernization. So they're going to really try and make sure that we have more diverse clinical trials. It's something that really was pulled back and exposed during COVID. So on here is just some notes about kind of what they're looking for along those lines, but it's something that those who do run clinical trials through the FDA, it's something that they will be looking for. And it's something that Congress really prioritized, and they worked in a bipartisan way to kind of address this issue. Other agencies in HHS that received increases include the Agency for Research and Quality, or ARC, which got a 7% increase. SAMHSA got a 14% increase, which corresponds with a lot of mental health initiatives that were included in the year-end package. A lot of those are around mental health workforce and making sure that we have our workforce is up to date to deal with a lot of the mental health issues. As we know, that's something that has really been kind of at the forefront of our country and our news cycle since the pandemic. HRSA got a 10% increase, and including the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program, rural workforce programs, the Bureau of Health Workforce, maternal health initiatives all received increases. If anyone wants to talk HRSA with me, that is my background. Happy to talk about it at a different time. Can go all day on that one. As well as ASPR received about a 17% increase. Most of that increase is in BARDA, which got a 27% increase, and a majority of that was actually replenishing the national strategic stockpile, which was really out there. So while there is huge increases for that agency and that office, a lot of that is designated to making sure that we can handle future pandemics. Now, switching gears, we're going to talk a little bit about the Department of Defense and their medical research programs, which is a huge priority here at CU, and not only Dr. Flagg, as well as Chancellor Elliman. So the Defense Health Agency gets about $3.4 billion in research every year. About $1.51 billion is in the congressionally directed medical research programs. There's other research opportunities, which has about $1.5 billion. This is actually a great picture. We had Brigadier General Kate Simonson on campus, who runs a lot of the research and development programs at DHA, and she's actually signing an educational partnership agreement with Dr. Vic Babarda and his combat research team, which we'll talk about a little more, and they're all sitting up here right now, who are really utilizing the other research opportunities within the Department of Defense to really come up with cutting-edge medical research. So the congressional directed medical research funding programs, here's a list of all of them. You can kind of see the value of them. The reason that they were created is because Congress realized they have a longstanding agreement with NIH that they cannot tell NIH what to research. They can give money to institutes, they can try and guide them, but they cannot tell them what to do. They realized they can tell the Department of Defense what to do. So that's why they created these congressionally directed medical research programs, and Congress literally puts, they're not in a president's budget, and then they get put into every year's appropriation bill. At about the 1.52 billion, approximately 600 million is for cancer research. You'll see 150 million is for breast cancer research. A lot of that is because that was actually the first CDMRP that was created, and it was created for breast cancer research to designate it from those lines. When we talk about the combat casualty care and non-CDMRP funding, there's about 1.5 billion in that. It's more directed to the impacts on the battlefield and how to do the health care of the warfighter. As I mentioned, the CU Center for Combat Research is really doing an amazing job of increasing our profile within the Department of Defense and really utilizing that research. If anyone's interested in that, I recommend them talking to Dr. Babardo, who's sitting up in the front row over there. We actually had Congressman Crow to tour the center. He sits on the Armed Services Committee, so he's really interested in military medicine and way to goes along those lines. So this, like I said, this is something that is a priority for the campus and something that we are really looking to get more involved in. We have some really expert outside consultants who are not only experts in this from how it functions in the agency, but how it functions with our lawmakers. They did 2 webinars, one for the basic sciences and one for the cancer programs, because there's a little bit of a different process. So feel free to, I know they're going to send out these slides to watch the webinar. At the end, if you have any questions about these, our consultants are also going to help take some selected projects to the agencies and help guide through the applications. So if anyone's interested, we also have the forms on that. Laura Buccini, who's sitting right over there, is my partner on this effort. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, but this is something that continues to remain a priority for our campus. Now we're just going to switch closely to the VA. The VA medical research funding programs included $916 million for the VA medical and prosthetic research program, which is about a 4% increase. Within the VA, something we do monitor is the language that they put into it, and it continues to limit research on dogs, cats, and non-human primates. It also directs the VA to allocate at least $10 million to support partnerships with the National Cancer Institute. So we do kind of see how Congress can feel like they can manipulate agencies that are not the NIH, so they choose the VA for animal research as well as one of them. Included in the year-end bill is also the VA Infrastructure Powers Exceptional Research Act, or VIPER Act, which I may say is Congress's greatest acronym they have ever come up with. And they do try to come up with great ones. And it reauthorizes the programs that is appropriated above and ensures the continuity of existing research academic affiliations with VA hospitals across the country. So these programs, they expired, I think, 4 years ago. So they finally got them reauthorized, which is really great to see. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the National Science Foundation. A bill that received a lot of attention last year and last Congress was the CHIPS and Science Act, which was signed into law on August 9th, 2022. A lot of the attention around this is about early career researchers, sexual harassment research in the sexual harassment in the research enterprise, and racial disparities when you're trying to develop science researchers. It's consistent with a lot of the themes that we've been hearing throughout the presentation that members of Congress have been really focusing on. The bill also authorizes $81 billion for the NSF over 5 years. That includes an authorization of $20 billion for the new Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. But authorizations do not equal funding. It's something that we kind of deal with in Congress. When they do an authorization, it's much more about how an agency is organized, and then they give a dollar value of what they think an agency should be funded at. The appropriators in Congress then decide what it should be funded at. So the CHIPS and Science Act authorized the National Science Foundation at $16.2 billion a year. The final bill authorized it, the final appropriations bills gave it $9.9 billion, which is historic funding for the NSF. Of the $9.9 billion, about $980 million was in one-time supplemental funding to kind of develop these initiatives. But it is far short of what got a lot of media attention, what has been reported for within the NSF in that infrastructure. So not to be like a downer on the NSF or anything, but I think if the opportunities there aren't as much as people initially thought and hoped that they would be for growth there, we'll definitely see some growth for the specific medical research programs that are included within the NSF. But since the growth was only about 12%, you have every college and university and a lot of other entities that are super excited about this bill. So just kind of wanted to tamper a little bit of expectations on what Congress actually achieved with that. So that's it for the agencies. One of the things I want to highlight is who our government contacts are in the Anschutz campus. So I'm your contact with any federal official or any federal agency. My colleague, Rebecca Massey, is our new state relations colleague. Her email can be found here. If you have any questions about anything that happens at the UC health system, my very close colleague, Chantel Taylor, her email's there. She's the one who's at the forefront with not only the state legislature, but Congress, and we work together in Congress for that, as well as Children's Hospital has Zach Zaslow and Ellen Stern. All of us were constantly talking to make sure that the Anschutz Medical Campus, we're all kind of moving as one, and all our initiatives are moving forward with each other. So that's all that I have. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
And Brett, yeah, round of applause for Brett. Great presentation. I think this is a great example of the president's office, the systems office, and the advocacy that takes place on our behalf in Washington, D.C. And I think it's very educational too. A lot of us that are deeply embedded in this don't understand the nuances of what happens in Washington. So I've got a mic. I can help with questions. If people have, they can just raise their hand. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, as you probably know, McMorris-Rogers has a child with Down syndrome and has been working very closely with the C Foundation to try to increase funding for Down syndrome research. The advantage of that is that people with Down syndrome have a lot of comorbid problems, including, of course, Alzheimer's disease, basically in 100% of them. So that might be a very good approach with Michelle Whitten at the C Foundation to really get McMorris-Rogers interested in all aspects of medical care and research related to Down syndrome, but obviously with implications for everything else.
And that's something that the chairwoman talks about a lot. So last Congress, when she was ranking member, there was plenty of hearings on medical research, and she talked about it all the time, and she's a huge champion for that. So it's something that we do expect her to maybe hold a hearing or two on. The problem is she's not an appropriator. So she can put in requests to increase funding for it, but she's an authorizer. So when we do kind of see the NIH authorization language on how they may kind of shape the agency moving forward, we'll see if she puts a special emphasis on that. I wouldn't be surprised if she does. That's what they always tend to do. They tend to pick the projects that are personal for them along those lines. But yeah, unfortunately, I think she's going to draw attention to it in a really great way. And like I said, we'll definitely monitor, see if she holds any hearings on that. But unfortunately, there's going to be really tough fiscal environment this upcoming year for fiscal year 2024. So it's going to be a big fight. So unfortunately, with her not being an appropriator, she can put in requests like every other member of Congress does, but she will not be making the final decision on that one.
Great presentation, thank you. I had a question about the ARPA-H program organization, and whether it's going to be disease-focused program areas, or is it more basic and clinical translational research areas? There's been a little bit of flurry of activity in the patient groups trying to lobby the ARPA-H leadership and make sure that the diseases, their diseases or the children's diseases are, highlighted in their new programming. But I wonder how the organization of the program directors is going to be, the officers who actually manage the grant portfolios.
And I really wonder the answer to that question too. I think that's something that is really a big unknown. They started the agency without having an authorization. So now that they actually have an authorization, they can kind of guide and shape it, which will now allow them to move faster to hire program officers. ARPA-H leadership has been really silent on what their approaches are, as they're still just trying to staff up internally to make sure that they can kind of handle the stuff that they need. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what they choose with the program offices, but it could go either way. And I think a lot of that will be at discretion of the director. I was gonna say, a quiet bunch is making it easy for me.
There's one up here. Who raised their hand? You did? Okay.
Brett, what about the recently BART has been elevated to, they changed sort of how it's structured. And I didn't know if that was reflected in the budget or not, or maybe that's why they get their increase.
It's a little bit reflected in the budget. We do expect more of BARDA reorganization to be included in the Pandemic and All Hazardous Preparedness Act reauthorization that's happening this year. When Congress did the Prevent Pandemics Act, they intentionally did not really do a lot of reorganization of ASPR and BARDA, knowing that they had to do it a year from now. So they did. So it was really conscious by former health chairs Patty Murray, as well as former ranking member Richard Burr, to not include it in it. So while there is some organization going on right now, its authorization is up this year, and it could get reorganized even further. So I do think a little bit of that reflects it. But I think if you kind of look at health funding in general since the pandemic, a lot of that has come from, it's really obvious and it's a lot easier to advocate for increased health funding after the COVID-19 pandemic. It really pulled back the curtain on a lot of the issues that our country was facing in its public health infrastructure. So I think between the reorganization, what may be coming along those lines, it's a lot of why it got a bunch of the increase. But as I said, a big chunk of that increase for BARDA was for the National Strategic Stockpile. It was nearly almost gone by the time they needed to kind of replenish it very quickly. So a lot of it is from that end as well.
So from a big picture, kind of a big picture question, when you look at the allocation of congressional funds and the research portfolio of CU Anschutz, where do you think are the biggest areas of opportunity for growth among our research teams?
That is a great question. And obviously, I think we still have to look at the National Institutes of Health and kind of see which institutes within NIH are getting increases. So I think NIMHD is like a huge one, got nearly a 15% increase. But outside of the NIH, I definitely think the CDC, you're looking at a 25% increase. Congress just bipartisanly passed the Prevent Pandemics Act. When that bill was in the committee, it passed their committee 20-2, which you see very few things passed by that large of a bipartisan fashion. So I definitely think there's a lot of opportunities with public health forecasting and research around public health data in that end. I'll also say the Department of Defense is another one. We're really building our relationship with the Defense Health Agency and leaders at the Pentagon and in the medical research aspect of the Department of Defense. So there is plenty of opportunities there. And I think one that tends to get overlooked a little bit, that people are so focused on NIH, they forgot that DoD has all this funding too. So I think those outside of NIH, those are definitely the two agencies where the most opportunities for research growth are.
Any more questions? Oh, great.
Brett, thank you for this. I feel like this has always been this black box to me that I just didn't understand where all the money was coming from and so forth. My question is, for those of us here thinking how we can help impact this or help your office, like, is it if we're in DC to let you know and maybe come talk to people, or is it just through doing our work and press releases, or like, how do we as a faculty in a campus try to help influence this for CU as well?
The answer is all of the above. So anything that you all are doing, anything with press releases, any new grants, any new discoveries, please let me know. We love showing it to our delegation. Our members in Colorado, they are huge fans of CU Anschutz, and all of them really support all the work that we're doing. So we love kind of sharing and highlighting all the work as being really the only large academic medical center in Colorado. Our influence is a lot higher. I will say, if you're ever in DC, please let me know. If you have something to share, we can easily go to Member of Congress. I know there's bunch of you in the room I have worked with, either if it's been in person or virtually with our members. Same thing with agencies. If you have any questions, feel free to do that. As well, if you're getting contacted by a staff as an expert, please just flag that for me. It's just really great for me to know that. But anytime you go proactively to Congress or to the administration, please let me know. You do have to work through us on that. And another thing that will be really helpful for us this year, something that is always my biggest fear, is congressional oversight. And they can reach out to our campus on inquiries of certain maybe hot button issues like animal research, fetal tissue research, CAR T cells, things along those lines. So if anyone has anything along those lines, please immediately contact me. We work really closely with our university and system council to kind of provide responses along those lines. So don't ever feel like you are alone. If anything ever happens with the federal government, please, as many of you guys know here, you can email me at any time. Do not think you're flooding my inbox. So just happy to be a resource for y'all.
A question over here.
With older adult population increasing the quickest and biggest for our country and most underrepresented in research, what priority areas do you think within the NIA are there for research, but also the other agencies that might be focused on the aging space?
So I unfortunately do not know the answer to that question. I will actually turn to my colleague, Laura Buccini, who does a lot of the research development work here. I do think it's something that's overlooked. And I do know when you even look at the geriatric workforce programs that our population's aging rapidly, and we don't even have enough geriatricians out there to care for the population. And it's something that there are many members of Congress have been raising a little bit as an issue, but we haven't really seen it translated in yet. I think it's also something that kind of took a backseat to pandemic preparedness. I think it's something in 2019 was kind of on the precipice, and then the world changed in early 2020, and that kind of the focus shifted to like the advanced research development and our public health infrastructure. So I definitely think it's something we'll continue to monitor and kind of see it, but I know it's a problem that there are many members of Congress. Congresswoman DeGette is huge on this one, as well as Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from Illinois. So it's something that there is a lot of interest in. So we'll definitely keep anyone posted if there are any opportunities that arise.
Any other questions? So with that, I'll just say, I think one of the fun things in this, the role for me has been to understand some better parts of the system of how we're working together, and getting to know Brett and his colleagues, understand that there's this advocacy going on for us as researchers at the state and federal level. Has been really great to better understand. But I think it's been great information today. I think one of the things I heard ARPA-H, some questions about that we've been talking about a lot. As those developments become more apparent, we're in close contact. We'll make sure to amplify that information. There's a lot of interest now that's going to exactly come together. So that's one of the things we'll be clear to do. So
and I think that's the number one question right now in the medical research community, with number two being gain of function, if you're kind of ranking them, because ARPA-H now does have a directorate to move forward and has Congress's kind of support and approval to really start making grants. So how quickly they move, who they hire, who they do, no one really knows. As I said, they only have 25 staff. They literally hired last week their congressional relations person, as well as a communications manager. So they're really moving slowly on that end, but we do expect it to move quickly, given the fact that when they hire program officers, they have to come in with ideas in mind and basing it off of the DARPA model. The other thing I'm really interested to see in ARPA-H is, considering it is an institute within NIH, how much they can actually skirt NIH rules. That was a big issue last Congress, how actually a bipartisan majority in the House wanted the institute to have the agency be its own institute within HHS and not within NIH because of that exact reason. So it'll be really curious to kind of see how it moves forward. My gut tells me it'll be a little wonky in the beginning, and it's not going to be the smoothest transition because it is a brand new agency, and that's what happens pretty much anytime something new happens. But as Dr. Flake said, we are in constant communication anytime things along these lines happen. So we'll definitely let you know. And if they do bring up NIH authorization and they kind of talk about the way that is structured, we'll definitely be reaching out through Dr. Flake's office to really make sure that our university has robust comments and putting the impact of the NIH and making sure it still is the great agency that it is to this day.
Well, let's give Brett a great round of applause. Thanks so much, Brett.